I bet when you see the ocean, you're drawn to the strength inside the waves. But if you get caught within the ocean, the undertow will let you lose your way. I bet when you reach the ocean, can't wait to sink your toes into the sand. Instead you'll sink into the ocean and watch your heart pull slowly from your hands. Oh. She's calling. She's calling. She's calling. She's calling. Someday you will reach the desert, held by the warmth within the skies. Breathe in the exhale of the desert and see yourself reflected in her eyes. The moment you reach the desert, you realize she's been singing a song of life and love. To your surprise, you're singing with the desert. You've always known the words to sing along. You have a voice to share. You have a voice. You have a voice. You're coming home where you belong. She's calling. She's calling. Oh, she's calling. She's
Amen, amen. And thank you, Jen and choir, for ministering to us today. Our reading is an excerpt by Jerry Moore. The Atacama Desert is the driest desert in the world. Parts of the Atacama have not been splashed by a raindrop in recorded history. We were at the location of the longest poem in the world, a 4-word poem that stretches over 3 kilometers, a creation of the Chilean poet Raul Zurita. And the poem, 3 kilometers long, reads, Ni pena ni miedo, neither shame nor fear. Born in 1951, Zurita was swept up in the repression that followed the 1973 overthrow of Salvador Allende and the dictatorship of Pinochet. Initially imprisoned with hundreds of other political prisoners in the pitch black hold of a ship, After his release, Zurita used his art as a tool of resistance. This geoglyph is one result. In Zurita's case, we know the context that created his art, the tortures and disappearances during the 17 years of the Pinochet regime, the response and resistance that poetry reflects, the capacity for works of art to respond profoundly to human events of enormous scale, whether genocides or broken hearts. Of his poetry in general, Zurita commented, "Art draws attention to things of this magnitude. Poetry is something like the hope for that which has no hope." I'll just say it's really special to be here with you all this morning with this music and this winter sun and the little baby noises, and earlier my child screaming from the daycare. Bless Lisa. Thank you for welcoming me into this sermon series with you all. I've long loved deserts, though famously when I did what felt like a really big research project in like second grade that culminated in a poster board presentation in front of the whole school, my proposal was to do this project about desserts. And my teacher was sure that I had misspelled deserts. But I did indeed instead research the history of eating sweets at the end of a meal and various cultures' attitudes towards sugar. But back to deserts, one S. I love them. I think maybe a thing from growing up mostly in Ohio, which is very much not a desert. And I've been very privileged to see a few. Studying abroad in Namibia, where the largest sand dunes in the world, I think, go as far as the eye can see. Bringing all of the bedding from a hostel up onto the roof in Etosha National Park and getting yelled at, but doing it anyways to see the stars of the Southern Hemisphere. And visiting the salt flats of Uyuni, 10,000 square kilometers of white salt glinting without pause, as far as you can see in every direction. My partner Oscar and I drove with a guide to lie in the middle of the salt desert on a moonless night and see the Milky Way glowing brighter than I've ever seen it and shooting stars everywhere. And of course, the deserts of the US Southwest. I didn't realize our choir was going to channel the desert colors, and here I am in my Lunar New Year bright red. But just to show that the deserts are expansive, I met the deserts of the Southwest after our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in Phoenix, Arizona some years ago. I got to hike the mountains and put out water in the desert as humanitarian aid for people crossing. And years later, serving our Unitarian Universalist Association in our justice ministry, came back with other faith leaders to support the vital and then and now criminalized humanitarian aid work that I know so many of you are familiar with. I came back again later to bear witness to Operation Streamline, part of the deportation machine that we know is growing and violent then and now, and to learn from those providing home hospitality in the UU communities there. I heard stories of communities of faith and spirit in the borderlands who would take people in after crossing, offer life-saving water, shelter, transportation, actions that could be considered crimes then and are at greater risk of being criminalized now. Heard elders share how they knowingly engaged in work that could risk a jail sentence because of their values, their conviction. Those lessons stayed in my heart. Lessons of what our Unitarian Universalist values of justice and liberation for all people, of interdependence, love at the center, look like in the very old and confusing to me words of John Milton when they are not cloistered, unexercised, unbreathed, but as he said, when they are tested by trial, not without dust and heat. Ni pena ni miedo. I came back to the land of dust and heat in 2018 for healing this time, as many do. I had had an abortion, which can be a big thing or a little thing or a medium thing. It can be hard or easy. Mine was sort of medium, but I really knew I needed space to process physically and emotionally. My dear friends welcomed me with hikes and yoga, silence, and writing, a lot of this and this. And let me say all the messy things I hadn't had a chance to say. I wrote letters to the beginning that was mine and no one else's choice to end, letters to my partner at that time, to myself, and I let the desert take them. It was a hard chapter, and my friends and the desert could not make it go away, but they made sure I didn't go it alone. And at its core, that's what we do here in spiritual community. That's what we do and have done for a long time, and that's what we'll do now. We may not be able to make it go away, though we will sure as hell try. And what we cannot change, we will make sure we do not go alone. By 2023, when my daughter was born, abortion had become criminal in a new way. And we know that we face so many aspects of injustice in this moment of time. The words of the Reverend Julian Soto, especially poignant as our communities in Southern California continue to face the devastation of another form of dust and heat. Reverend Soto writes, "Everything is still on fire, despite our best efforts. In addition to living, it is clear that fire or not, we must level up what it means to thrive. We know where we fall short and where we flourish and where we still reach. Everything is still on fire, but all is not lost." Last spring, I got to go to the installation of a Unitarian Universalist colleague in Arizona, and I looked at that community deep in the borderlands who had been living with the criminalization of migration, the dehumanization of immigrants, attacks on reproductive justice for a long time, attacks that we now face across the country, and tried to listen for what lessons they could share with the rest of us. Lesson one that I heard and learned: in times of dust and heat, personally and politically, look for the shade. There is always shade. If any of you have lived in a very hot place, you know that there's things you just don't do when the sun is right there in the sky. There's things you do when the shade comes, in the early morning and the after sunset. And it doesn't mean that the heat of the day goes away. It's always somewhere in the background, relentless. But the shade is the balm that allows for endurance, for the keeping going. Who has felt overwhelmed this week? Afraid? Anyone felt numb? Anyone felt surprised? Anyone felt very, very not surprised? Anyone found a moment that felt like shade, even if it was a tiny, tiny moment? Maybe it was a treat, a song, a moment of silence, cathartic, hysterical laughter, a hug, taking a risk together, setting a boundary. What are some things that gave you shade this week? Just shout it out and I'll repeat it back in the mic. Choir rehearsal, quiet. Walks in the woods, reading, playing with kids, children, family, volunteering, friends, a cup of tea, trashy romance novels and live music, fantasy novels, baking bread. There have been many moments like this in our personal lives and in the life of this community and in the life of the world where awful things happen and we fight to change them, and some of them will change and some of them we won't change. And what makes the unbearable bearable is finding moments of shade. For me, I'll say it's elevating my heart rate, even if that is literally doing 5 jumping jacks while I'm making dinner and watching my 1.5-year-old. For me, it's people I can text and vent to who just know and get it. And for me, it's going outside and letting there be some light on my face, even if it's freaking freezing. Many of us, trans and queer, immigrant and indigenous, Palestinian, Muslim, Jewish, disabled and poor, many of us have been in the dust and the heat for a long, long time. And we know what we should never have had to learn, what gives us shade so we can survive. And that is wisdom for all of us, that even on the hottest day in Namibia or Arizona, shade offers some relief, some break that allows for endurance. Lesson 2. There is nothing like spring in the Sonoran Desert to remind me that heat and dust are not antithetical to life. The plants are a million metaphors for life that is accustomed to heat, that thrives and blooms amidst it and because of it. One way to deal with heat, find the shade. Another way, adapt to it, learn it, know its rhythms, and find resilience and stamina within it. That saguaro cactus, growing 3 stories tall, its roots so wide, storing its water, being home to animals, being useful to humans because it knows how to navigate the heat, survive it, and be itself within it. We have all, to some extent, evolved alongside of horrors of injustice in different ways. And we do have wisdom within ourselves of how to thrive and even bloom amidst it. Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams titled his memoir, "Not Without Dust and Heat." He said, "Spiritually significant change takes place only when one discovers that they must make a decision for a way of life that distinguishes them and their whole orientation from one who has not made a decision." Very fancy way of saying, I think that this is stuff that changes us, and how we show up in these moments when our values are uncloistered, tested by trial, is who we are in the real, messy human world, in the dust and the heat. Back in Boston, inspired by what I had learned in the desert, I found my way into being part of an anti-deportation network that many of you have contributed to or are part of over the years. We've provided accompaniment, letter writing, home hospitality, transportation support, and bond money. And there's been many moments when our values have been tested. On Wednesday, 50 of us from communities across the state targeted by deportations in different ways gathered to build relationship, trust, and coordination. And in the middle of our time together, our phones started blowing up with alerts of ICE in East Boston, Chelsea, Everett. In real time, we broke into groups to map the current rapid response resources and their gaps. There is no one coming to solve our problems or save us, but we are humans doing the best that we can. We have shade, We have deep wisdom about how to resist and survive. We know how to embody our values out in the dust and the heat. At that meeting on Wednesday, we closed by calling to mind something from our roots that is a source of power. Maybe our own roots in our family, maybe a cultural or spiritual lineage that we are part of, maybe an ancestor, spiritual or familial. Maybe you take a moment right now to call to mind a person or a story or a teaching from your roots that has seen the dust and the heat and can ground you now, can be a source of power now. I'll name someone from our Unitarian Universalist roots, the Reverend Albert d'Orlando. He served the first Unitarian Universalist church in New Orleans in the 60s. Do folks know Reverend Albert? I didn't know much about him either. He served that congregation to deal with during the time of court-ordered school desegregation. And his congregation set up a freedom fund to provide legal and other assistance to those fighting for desegregation. The church's youth group participated in sit-ins at lunch counters on Canal Street, and 2 young people were arrested and charged with criminal anarchy. They were sentenced to 10 years in prison. And through Reverend Orlando's leadership, the church raised money to appeal the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the convictions were thrown out. In 1962, the church paid legal expenses for 2 Black students who filed a federal suit to integrate Tulane University. And when they were admitted, the congregation paid their registration fees and for their books. Reverend Orlando was targeted for his work, ordered to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. His house was firebombed while he was working on a sermon he planned to deliver the next morning, condemning similar bombings in Alabama. And 2 months later, the front of the church was destroyed by dynamite. Reverend Orlando's words, "It was not at all unusual for us to receive phone calls at 3 a.m, warning us that if we did not leave the house, a bomb would destroy our home." Values tested, exercised, uncloistered, out there in the dust and the heat. Our ancestor James Luther Adams also wrote, "A living tradition is not bequeathed through some law of inheritance. It must be earned, not without dust and heat, and not without humbling grace." Maybe you draw to mind someone who has lived in the dust and the heat, whose wisdom you're turning to these days. Maybe you share who that person is or what that story is when we're in coffee hour, or maybe you text it to someone who you know needs a reminder of where we've been and the power at our back. Desert lessons. Know what gives you shade so you can get out of the heat when you need to. Learn from others who've been in the dust and the heat and respect their wisdom and knowledge. Share what you know. Share something you've learned from your own journeys in the dust and the heat, or invite someone to catch some shade together. Now is the time to share everything we know about how to thrive and even bloom, how to build deep and wide roots that sustain in even the most desperate times, how to store what nourishes us wisely and share it generously, how to find a pace and a rhythm that allows us to survive each season in turn, as the saguaro does, and to look to those who have been in the fire a long time for their wisdom and lessons. It is the time for our uncloistered values, exercise tested alive in the world, in the dust and the heat. Ni pena ni miedo, the artist wrote in the desert. Neither shame nor fear. Surviving the exact kind of torture meant to bring down shame, to create only fear. The saguaro survives season after season, roots wide, water conserved, creating a home for life in the hot, hot sun. May we be the shade, may we live in the heat, and may it be so. Our closing hymn is one of my favorite songs to sing any day, and definitely one of my favorites to sing these days. Where you go, I will go. That is the promise that we make, that your people are my people, and that where you go, I will go. And we'll keep making that promise to each other and making it real, day after day, moment after moment, year after year. Yes. We'll find the shade, we'll grow our roots deep, we'll store water, we'll share water, and we'll take care of each other. Your people are my people are yours. We go together. Amen, and may it be so.